Yeah, it's been around.
Oh, I was wondering who did
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So, he does a lot for the Rendezvous, the international supply in New Jersey, and he gathers them up every year and has a party and then brings them out here. But we love him. He's been wonderful help. So anyway, I'll let it get started.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, Brett. Brett and I have, first of all, I'm Scott Dow, Brett McLain is in here. We've been talking all week about what our seminars are going to be like, and we keep intermingling and crossing ideas, and decided, you know, it's going to take a little pressure off both of us if we can stand up here together, and every time I look really blank in the face and don't know how to respond, he can jump in and help me. So hopefully
equally look just as blank.
Yeah, and if both of us are blank, then you guys got to jump in and help us too. To get started, I have a couple things that I brought in that I wanted to pass around. Kind of going to go out of order. When Liz asked me to do this seminar, I posted online and said what I basically put down my background in art, which I suppose I should take the opportunity to tell you now. I have a bachelor's in drawing and a master's in sculpture from Edinburgh, University of Pennsylvania. It was a 6-year degree. I can't encourage you enough to I think Roger touched on this yesterday too. If you don't draw, to start drawing. It's such a great way to work through preliminary ideas, quick flashes of things you might be thinking about. It's kind of like taking notes when you have a profound thought that comes up and you want to write it down so you don't forget it next month. That's the way sketching is to me. Anyway, this is a bronze skull that I made in. Actually, it was a clay that I did in Sculpture 1, and I came back in Sculpture 2 and cast the bronze. I don't know that we'll get into the process of bronze casting today, but I would be happy to go through that with anybody if they'd like. The reason I'm passing it around, one, is to show you what is a possible texture and form that you can get with clay modeling. In this case, I used just a butter knife and little tiny pieces of clay. It was an additive process. We started by building a wire armature and then added the clay on top and used it. It was an observational study. We talked about different ways of when you're trying to build a form like this, how you need to locate this and then compare it to where this is compared to where this is. And if you keep working back and forth and comparing where things occur, not only from the front view, but from the side view and the top view and the bottom view, you can keep rotating that in your mind and finding those points that you build up to a somewhat correct form. As you guys look at this, some of you anyway had questions or about making faces. They wanted to improve the way that you sculpt a head or a face. To me, everything has to start at the very basis, which in terms of the face is the skull. So take note of, if you hold it like you would see a head of a person standing, the depth of the side of the eyes compared to the bone on the front of the nose, compared to the width of the cheeks. This is not completely anatomically accurate. The things are solid just due to the metal casting process. Actually, there would be hollows where muscle is able to pass through and such. But anyway, this is a hollow bronze, by the way. It's very thin, about 1/8 of an inch thin, maybe a little thicker at the very base. But you'll be surprised how heavy it is for being hollow. So, can I start with you, Cindy? Next thing I want to pass around, you're going to have to go through this quick because there's a lot of people and we're going to be done in like 8 more minutes or something. Try to be quick. This is Michelangelo, a book that I use a lot. I also studied the Italian Renaissance is my favorite period. It's the movement in their work is important to me. It's certainly not important to everybody, but Michelangelo, a lot of people say, well, his work was great because he understood anatomy. yes, he understood anatomy, but I believe it's deeper than that. I believe his work is great because he captures that very basic essence of not even movement, of life itself. And he of course builds wonderful anatomy on top of that. It's that very first, Bob said it yesterday, I believe, when you see somebody in the silhouette of somebody that you know really well in the distance, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, you catch a glimpse of somebody you've known for 20 years, and the lighting's not very good, and you didn't see their face, you just maybe saw them disappearing down the hallway, you instantly know who they are. And that is the gesture, that is the essence, the movement, the life of that person. And I believe Michelangelo captured that, and his sculptures are not frozen people in space. They're in themselves, they have life and movement. So anyway, for those of you who know Michelangelo really well, maybe you'll just pass the book on to the next person. But please just go through quickly and find a piece that interests you and study it for a second and book it.
Michael's studies were so in depth, and you probably know this, that he would cut up bodies to see how they were made.
Illegally.
Completely
Illegally.
illegal.
Oh, seven.
Leonardo did.
Sneak into the board and dissect these things. That's serious stuff.
One
Make a good
more.
living being a grave robber.
Michelangelo, I posted this on the forum a couple times. It's one of my favorite quotes. I don't know if it's a direct quote of Michelangelo or not, but and we were taught that he believed that a sculpture should be able to roll down a mountain and break all to pieces and still be beautiful, and still each part should contain that essence of life that it had at the very beginning when it was still a whole. And that doesn't mean you have to make a sculpture that won't break, which is the way when my teacher first said that, that's the way I perceived it. Oh, so you got to make a sculpture that won't break if it rolls down a hill. That's not the point. It means if you break the arms off and the legs off and the head off, that in that torso is still the essence of the whole thing. So anyway, two more things to pass around. This is my one of my sketchbooks. I have 50 of them. What?
I want to see it.
Maybe not. I thought it was something I wanted to pass around. You guys can get an idea of how I think and try to work through things. I like to, sculpture and drawing is very similar. I draw on my sculptures, I sculpt with my pen. I'm always trying to build up forms with lines. And in my carvings, I'm always trying to use line to differentiate forms from each other and exaggerate certain things or get you to notice one transition more than the other. So anyway, if you quickly want to go through that. And the last thing, I'm actually going to do a quick illustration to go with this. This is just an oil-based clay model that's been in my shop for a year and fallen down and rolled in the sawdust. But this is something that is an excellent way for you, especially everybody, to, in addition to drawing to work out ideas, clay modeling, and even smaller than this. I sit at the TV and do little clay studies to work through ideas. Oil-based clay, pick up, there's one clean ball on top. Pick up that. The warmer it gets, the more you work it, the softer it gets. In this case, I built a little. Here, let me start this around and I'll illustrate what I did here. Very simple. All you need is some kind of base, piece of plywood. I like to, depending on the size, I'll use different strengths of wire. Drill little holes that match a wire, 2 or 3. Insert the wire into the holes and then drive screws right next to them. And then you can take the wire and do, whatever form you want and start adding the clay to it. And if you don't make it too rigid, you can change it, you can twist it as you go and then reformulate the clay. It's an excellent way to, if you want to learn how to make an eagle, it's an excellent way to sit in your living room while you're with your family and you're watching TV anyway, sit there and work out an idea. And oil-based clay does not dry, it doesn't crack, it lasts forever. You can mash it up and make it into something else. So,
Do you make your own?
oil-based clay? No, I buy it. But
Where do you get it?
Go ahead.
Where do you get it?
Just art supply stores. There's a store around there. It's called Michael's, but there's any good art supply store is going to have oil-based clay. There's also waxes that are excellent. Sculpture waxes are the same thing. Their hardness is based on temperature, so you can find different temperatures of waxes that are really soft and really stiff. And then, of course, you can put them in your refrigerator and make them really solid. Okay. So we got everything going around. Brett, you want to add anything to my rambling yet? All right. Couple things I wanted to touch on. Sculpture 1. I thought it was important. I don't know if any of you have ever taken sculpture at all, or drawing one in college. I just wanted to touch on what you might expect. I only went to one school, so I don't really know the curriculums of all the schools. We basically, in Sculpture 1, we try to touch on a few different things, and there's several different ways that you might run into if you take a class. Sculpture in general is, first of all, a 3D. We learn to make a 3D object. A 3D object would be like the skull, something that sits on a pedestal possibly, and you walk around it and you look at it from all sides. Another project we would do would be a frontal piece, meaning something that's maybe designed to go against the wall, or like a relief carving against the wall. So one of our projects would be designed to only view from that one side. It's still considered sculpture. It's not a drawing. It's something that has depth, whether it's a relief that has an illusion of depth or whatever, but it's designed to be viewed from one side. And then the third project would be something that's designed to be interactive, or something that you are kind of within. With the 3D, the skull, it was an observational study. We were all allowed to pick what we wanted to do. I had to beg to be allowed to do the skull, but most of it was we were doing seashells or interesting organic objects that we found. And it's really a lesson to be able to turn a small object in your hand and duplicate it, to be able to, like I said about the skull, be able to compare this to that, to this to that, and in the end you end up with the proportions correct, the textures in the correct place and such. So that would be an observational study. In the clay modeling, it was an additive process, so we do a 3D, an additive process in clay, and it's an observational study. So those are really the three objectives of that lesson. Another one we do is a subtractive. This is what we're all doing here. We're removing material to come to an end result, which is, in a lot of cases, much harder. It was definitely harder for me, maybe not everybody. In the case of the class that I would teach, subtractive, we do an abstraction of two objects. So in other words, I'd take two unrelated objects, like a machined form like a wood screw, and a very organic form like a seashell, and we create an abstraction in a carved plaster is what we use, because it's very soft and very, very quick, something you can do as a group, cast your own sizes to carve. But it's a really interesting project, to look at two very different qualities of objects, and the problem is, okay, how do we join qualities of each and come up with an interesting sculpture? So that would be a subtractive method of carving. We're not doing a direct observation. We're just using information from both objects and doing an abstraction of each. And the third would be, can be many things, a construction. Learn, in a Sculpture 1 class, you don't know the level that people come. Some people have never put anything together in their life. They don't even know how to use a wood screw or a piece of wood or even hot glue maybe. So we do a construction. So you're learning to put things together. An assemblage, might be part of it where you're using found objects. You're using things that interest you for whatever reason. Joe Regal posted something on the forum of that little gun he made. There's several things he does. They're just he has a beautiful sense of organizing found objects. So that could be part of it. And another one that I really like to do is to take an object like a chair, a wooden chair we often use, and you have to take it apart and reorganize the elements to take away its original function, but you can only use those elements. It can be a really neat design project where you're forced to, unlike the project where we're taking two different elements and combining them in an abstraction, you're taking something that we're all familiar with, disassembling it, and arranging it in a new way, which is a very cool project.
I'd like to jump in there.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've took some, I've got 60 some odd credits at a county college, so I couldn't go to a real school and get a real art degree. So most of what I've learned is being self-taught. I was involved in art when I was young, sculpting and drawing and whatever my parents threw at me. And then I went and had some formal training with art teachers. And a lot of this stuff, like I hear a lot of people say, oh, but all I care about is this kind of art form, wildlife or realism or whatever it is. And well, I don't really care about, abstraction or design or, construction. And it wasn't until I started doing going to these classes, doing these practices that I didn't really care about otherwise.
Right.
And then was like, wow, when I went back to the things that I really was passionate about, I learned incredible things about a seashell and what a seashell and a screw taught me, and applied it to my other studies. And you learn so much by doing these other things that aren't your sculpture, not your main focus maybe, but
Maybe more.
yeah.
Maybe more. If you step outside of what you think you're setting out to do, and open yourself up for an idea that you never considered, that's when you really start to grow. Especially, I don't want to get way off track, but especially in an event like Ridgway, if you spend all year trying to learn how to carve bears, and you come to Ridgway and you come and you try to carve a bear, perhaps it's not the best approach for you as an artist. If you came here and you try to do something you've never done before, although you may not have the most successful piece in the end, you probably grew more, and you'll go home and what you learned will improve your bears, whether you believe it or not. You still want to go there, Brett, or you want me to?
No, it's gone.
Okay. And just on the last part of the sculpture one, we always did it's kind of borderline architectural 3D design, call it interactive space, where the idea is that you have to create or alter a space. It was within our school building that we had to do this. And it was a really neat project. We usually use string, because string is something you can cover a lot of ground with without a lot of material, a lot of money. So if you can imagine the things you can create with a lot of string in a space like this, we had some really neat results with that as a great project. So those are some things you might run into in Sculpture 1. I want to...
Scott,
Yes?
Nick would like to ask
Oh,
you.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I don't know if it's the right time, but did you ever apply any of the principles of the Fibonacci sequence to any of your sculptures?
No, I'm not.
Consciously?
I'm not even familiar with that.
Oh, sorry, golden section?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
no, but it is something we would touch on in 3D design. We would
Yeah.
go over the...
It's just that proportion is
Right.
naturally good looking to the eye.
Yeah.
And if you analyze sculptures that appeal to the eye, you often find that proportion is within them.
Yeah.
So if you're conscious of that proportion in the first place, you can apply it to your sculpture.
Right.
And it helps to make it look right.
Yeah, in sculpture, we never did that. In design, we would touch on artists. Leonardo was, who developed it? What do you call it?
Fibonacci.
Well,
Well,
actually,
he
there's a slight
identified,
difference.
he identified the relationship.
Right, but it comes from Greek construction originally,
It
yes.
goes back a long, long way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, to answer your question, we did not apply it directly, at least in my sculpture class. So,
What was the name of that again?
he's saying
Fibonacci.
Fibonacci. I don't-
If you did a search for the golden section
Or the
Golden
golden,
section?
or the golden
section.
equation.
In its basic form, it's the relationship between 8 and 13.
It's a mathematical principle, and Greek sculpture was all based on mathematics.
But it's all found in nature as well, like shells and stuff, honeycombs, things like that. It's replicated in nature.
I'm not super. I personally haven't studied it a lot. I was made familiar of it in art history and we touch on it in design, but it's not something, at least from my teachers, that they were, pressing us to look at closely. Maybe I should. Okay. I wanted to go to some basic things. Maybe some of you will be. Has anybody ever taken a mechanical drawing class? Okay. So basically, I wanted to approach mechanical drawing for those of you who haven't had it in something just basically what it is seeing things. I'm not going to be very good at drawing from this angle. Basically, it's seeing things from 3 different views. I'm using a cylinder here because we're talking about carving out of logs. If you're trying to carve a bear head, for example, just have 3 views. I have a top view, a front view, and a side view. In mechanical drawing, you can use the information from the first view that you create to pass to the other views. So if you're sitting home you want to learn how, you haven't carved a bear head yet, you want to figure it out, this is a great way to figure it out. You might take a view of a lovely bear here. Okay, so you have your front view of your bear that you can draw, and you can pass this information directly over the height of the eyes, and then you can find the bear again in the side view. Sorry, it's very hard to draw like this, but anyway. And then from the top view, again, you can pass this information. There's actually, if this is done correctly, you can use a 45-degree angle to find where the stuff actually occurs in space. So I know this ear is this far from the edge, so in the top view, ears occur this far from the edge. And you have to know the shape of the head, or this is where you learn the shape of the head and the eyes. So it's just a basic example of how you might use mechanical drawing to help you visualize, yeah. I like to, if I'm trying to work out something like a horse, for example, I like to do that first drawing, and then I use this formula to try to figure out, okay, now I knew I wanted to make this horse up on his hind legs. What would it look like from the top view, and what would it look like from the other view, which I'm, the opposite view of that I drew first. And it's a great way to work through an idea. And once you get to there, you would hope that you can create a 3-dimensional view somehow. And find it within your log, 3D would be the final step of that, being able to illustrate. Anything there, Brett?
I'm debating. I don't know how crazy it is. I find that if this is, I guess what's so crucial about this, like I was taught in school, you don't ever, like if you're drawing from life, you want to keep your eyes on the subject as much as possible, because otherwise you're making it up, or you're going from memory, which means you're making it up. And so you want to connect as much with your subject as possible, especially if you're doing realism. On the other hand, the more you sketch, and draw these things out, or whatever you're doing, the more you become familiar with the object, and that really occurs, in my opinion, inside, in your head. And being able to actually, like Roger's computer design, be able to rotate that in your mind, in your mind's eye. It depends, whether or not you want to do straight realism, or if you want to put some of that your own spin on it, and being able to refer to what's in your head in that model that's rotating in your head. Hopefully, after you've done enough of these studies, you can kind of connect the frames and rotate that, and kind of add your own juice into it. You know, it really isn't there in the model, and so that can also occur on the paper as well. You can put your extra spin on there and see how it looks, and that's why it's like, doing these practices are so quick and compared to actually carving the wood. Or
Right, and this is why, again, I want to go back to how drawing is so important, because you can go through so many ideas so fast. When I found chainsaw carving 3 years ago, roughly, before that I had done a couple stone carvings. I had done a lot of clay modeling and some bronze casting, which, if you've never done it, is so time consuming. And when I discovered chainsaw carving, I loved it because it was so similar to charcoal drawing, because it was so immediate. You could blast through ideas in 30 minutes or an hour. And to me, I still haven't got to the point where I'm interested enough to go in and carve nice eyes and nice noses. I just haven't cared yet. I'm so interested in other things and just blasting through, trying to figure out movements and gestures and anatomy. So, anyway.
Yeah, like this is another thing. I feel like elementary anyway, like abstract sculpture. A lot of people are like, oh, that's you can make any blobs. But a lot of times, if you take your sculpture and remove all the detail and abstract it back to a more basic form, if that form isn't beautiful and interesting without the fur, without the eyes, without the, that tells this obvious story,
Right.
There's these other these other aspects to the sculpture that are going on, whether you are identifying with them or not. And so if your form, it looks great because it's got some really cute eyes or whatever these details are, they're important. But if the structure's not there, if the motion isn't there, if these other aspects that are possibly a bit more subtle, the viewer, whether you're aware of it or not, you're being imprinted with it, and it has impact.
Great. Mike,
A lot of people coming into this for the first time, the question that I've heard asked most often is, how do you see that in a log? Now, with regards to doing the sketches and so on in the engineering style, like you've got your plan, elevation, side elevation, etc. With most wood carvers who are doing it by hand, they cut out a square block and they plot this on the sides.
Right.
When you confront them with a round log, some of them will go down the road of turning it into a square block, plotting it onto the side, and they're losing like half the wood straight away.
Right.
There seems to be a major problem for some people to actually apply the drawing to a round cylinder. Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, I'll certainly try. Try it. I'll stand aside. But it'll be from this Where's Liz? Next year we need like a 10-foot board because this is too small.
That would probably take some marking.
Yeah, but the background would be distracting.
Somebody get a spray can.
Got that wall back there.
I approach, like Brett was saying, without the structure, it doesn't matter how beautiful the surface is necessarily. It starts at the very base. Michelangelo's sculptures, yes, they had great anatomy on top, but it's that very first line that mattered. It was much easier in clay to do that and not lose that because you were starting with the very first line. You were starting with a piece of wire, so you could really play with that line and and compose it in space, and then build the clay on top of it and not lose that line. And carving really threw me for a loop, especially because it was the opposite. So how do you start with this initial sense, whatever you're trying to make? This is your initial line. How do you compose within a round cylinder? And if this is my vision of the movement of my piece, how do you hang on to that?
You have to do the same thing like you did with the drawings. Move to the other side, see it, and put the line on.
Yep. So that's it. It's true. It's for some people it's very difficult to even see the first line. The way I work is I will find the sense that I want to create, whether it's something like this or whether I have a short log and I really want to try to turn an animal all the way around it. Two different things, but a very similar approach, I would take. I find that line, and if we're talking about human form or bear form, the next two things that are important to me are the hips and the shoulders. Because you have to know if somebody's moving, the shoulders are on a different plane with the hips. And they don't change all that much. The shoulders, if this is the shape of the shoulders, it doesn't change a whole lot as you rotate it in space. And a little.
Scott, when you find the line, you cut it in, you get aggressive and you go ahead and cut it in, or do you nibble your way down there and
Nibble.
the log's very unforgiving. Once it's cut, and so I called it when I was getting started the fear of going deep.
Right.
There's that fear that, man, I think I'm on it, but so I'll nibble and shave and get down there. And I've noticed Dayton, that seems to be what Dayton does a lot of.
With that said, what I've always kind of pushed for, and I learned really early on, is that you understand you have that spatial cognizance, that spatial perception of what form is important. It's deciding on what is unimportant. It has to go away immediately so that your mind can focus on the important portion of your sculpture. So, like what you're saying, the nibbling, that's a very conservative and safe method of getting down to the basic form that you're intended.
And I do that because the log is very unforgiving. It's not like clay sculpture. Where I'll just put some more back in.
It is very unforgiving, but also, from my standpoint, if I try always to do it that way, my sculpture is very uninspiring at the end.
Yeah.
I tend to be as tight. So I try to, if this is my form, I want to see that initially, even if it's clear out here.
Right.
The first thing I do, and the first few competitions people went, oh my God, we've been carving for an hour. Your log already looks like this. I am willing to take a chance that if I make a beautiful shape to begin with, it's going to, even if my figure stinks at the end, the shape is still going to be beautiful. So to me, that is very, very important. So I try to find this. Now, back in the human form, the shoulders and the hips, like I said, are important. Rarely are they on the same plane if you have any movement. Now, I got to say something about movement. I don't believe that every sculpture should be this dynamic movement. The pyramids, Mayan tombs. The pyramid is one of the most stable forms on Earth. I mean, it is designed to look like it's going to stand there for thousands and thousands of years. That's what they wanted, this huge, heavy footprint. If you look at the figures that they make guarding the tombs, they're these perfectly straight. It's not because they didn't know how to make them move, it's because they didn't want them to move. They wanted those guards to appear like they're going to stand there forever. So you may approach your sculpture with movement by saying, I want none, or I want very little, or I want this dynamic guy throwing a frisbee. Anywhere in between is okay. I'm not saying your sculpture has to have movement, but you should, at least when you set out, know what your intention is, because it comes right down to that very beginning shape. Okay, anyway, so if I build my figure, I like to think in massive forms. Let me digress here for just a second. Build a snowman, maybe. Because it applies to anything, human figures, bears, whatever. If this is my shape, I can compose a snowman on here. Just 3 circles. Wait a little bit. It's so hard from here.
The snow's real sticky. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's pretend he's not snow. I'm composing these 3 circles on a line here. This is my figure. The next thing for me to consider in this is what are these materials? I made a mistake by saying snowman. So 3 spheres I'm composing on this. What is this material made out of? In other words, is it, what I have drawn here. In my final sculpture, what are these made out of? Very soft balls of feather, or are they made out of granite stones that are attached and you can't tell? It's very important because from here, I want, if this is the bend and I want to make them appear very soft, they're going to squish together, they're going to bunch in the middle, they're going to stretch on one side. So in figurative sculpture, in bare sculpture, whatever you're making, if you're turning something, everything in between this solid mass and this solid mass, something is happening to it. It's stretching, it has tension, it's bunching. So, where did I get lost?
I don't know, this is a bit 10 minutes ago, but one of this is kind of going back to drawing. I think one of the really relevant things that Scott started to touch on is like knowing where to put these bulges and how these soft spheres would be aware of each other is really different than the stone. You can discover how those look well in a 2D form, because when you view a sculpture, you can't view it 360 degrees at once. You're still viewing it as a 2D thing. So you can, you can explore these characteristics of the form 2-dimensionally and apply them immediately to the 3-dimensional form. You might have a difficult time getting this view to work with this view, but at least you know what you're going for, and that's a lot. That helps to get there.
Scott, what we're addressing, what he was asking about is how do you get down to the thing without nitpicking it, and how do you decide where to take away the big chunks in that?
Yeah, that's the question I was trying to avoid.
Thanks,
Dan. That's right.
Well, exactly on that subject. You were saying about the technical drawing. I've been filming myself here with stop frame animation, and hopefully I'll show you all later in the grill. But my absolute method is that technical drawing. Yeah, I do front back profile cut. Yeah, and I draw on the wood, on the cylinder, I hasten to add, as if it is a flat surface. I can try and get my brain around the idea that it curves away from me, and yet I still treat it as a flat surface when I draw on it. And then cut that first profile. And those 2 cuts will define absolutely the total intensity of the rest of the sculpture.
Right. Every
Every aspect of it follows those. Now I panicked because everyone was being so fast here. I'm going, oh my God, I've got to cut. So I then went in for the plunging and the kind of freestyle bit without doing what I normally do, which is east-west, left-right, the profile from the side. Yeah. Now what I discovered, one of my biggest pieces is a 12-foot, 140-year-old oak tree called the Eternal Man. And it's cut front back, side to side, and 45 degrees in between, yeah, just on those planes. Yeah, and it's cut horizontally, cross-cut, on those planes from 8 transparencies that I projected onto this cylinder. And I even corrected the transparencies for the fact that the shapes projecting on the cylinder went round the corners. Yeah, right. But if you're cutting a form, if it's a cylinder you're going for, yeah, with this method you end up with a hexagonal profile tube, yeah. But once you've got that hexagonal tube, you've only just got to round off the edges, and it is the cylinder. It only requires those 8 profiles to almost totally define the form. Right. You're there from 8 profiles. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does to me.
To sort of add to that method, I mean, I don't go to it to that extent, but I try to work from the 2 angles at 90 degrees from each other to an extent to start off with. And I find it really useful to use spray paint to spray a line on the floor to indicate the angle that you're looking at your piece. Because it's really easy to draw a line onto the log, which is the cylinder, and then step just 5 degrees off, and that line completely changes.
Yeah.
And it's
The line's
Oh,
irrelevant.
I see. Yeah.
I put a cross on the top.
across the floor at one angle and then a 90 degrees sometimes to enable me to fix myself in that viewpoint. And it allows you to walk 10 yards back from your piece, which is also really important to get a different perspective and to see, you know, where those cuts are going to go. And you can see it in the dirt on the bark or the fishes in the bark or whatever. And then, you know, fixing your eye from 10 yards where you want to make that cut to create the shape. And go up to the log and find that piece of bark or that piece of fish or whatever and spray it on with the paint. So,
I was hoping you might have mentioned like the old technology, just an old tip of the way to visualize things inside a log straight away. A sheet of clear acetate, fold it, roll it into a cylinder, and sellotape it roughly about the proportion you have your log, and make your clay figure to fit inside that.
Right.
Put it inside and rotate it, and you can see immediately which big bits of wood
Right.
you have to get rid of.
Did everybody hear what you said there? That is a good idea. Personally, I can't work off of my own, I don't work off my own models. In fact, I don't even take my models with me because I lose, the same as if I'm willing, I lose something about that. So I
Like
like,
you are a well-practiced and you went into this career early on. This is for people who haven't ever tried it before
right.
and are confronted with a cylinder
excellent
that
way.
they have to apply a shape to, and they don't know where to start.
Yep.
I know from teaching people how to chainsaw carve, you can never teach them how to do it, you teach them how to cut safely and so on.
Right.
But you'll show them how to cut something in a certain way, set them to it, and they'll make the cut completely the opposite direction because it's not fixed in their head exactly what's supposed to be there and what isn't. And they have a great deal of difficulty in actually applying that to a cylinder for the first time, just to get started.
Everybody want to add on? I'm going to try to answer Keith, how when I'm trying to decide what to take off, usually I'm doing some type of figure in some type of figure, but if the figure is doing this, the most important line for me is the spine. If I can find the spine, then from there I can find everything. And the way I work around a form is, you know, if I'm looking at the back and it's time to go around this corner, you don't commit and go deeper than you know, but from, if I've made that spine cut and I'm looking at this, okay, it's right in front of me, I'm looking at the curve of the spine. If I take 2 steps over, like you said, the line is different. So where is the right line? You know, take that cut, and then 2 more steps, take that cut, and if you do it correctly, when you get around to the other side, it's right. So that's kind of the way I find those things.
I think another really important thing is that there are so many methods that are, you know, some people find it really easy to do one thing, and other people, you know, start from different places, but often will end at the same place or, you know, similar place. And it's really, I think, really important to try these different, you know, a pencil drawing might not be your thing, but you change the scale of the paper if you're trying to do a study. Try doing it big. Try doing it in different styles. Try doing big, you know, real big cuts and going deep. You know, you might surprise yourself. You know, exploring that and be willing to take the risk.
In that figure also, I just want to get back to where it was here for a second. I have indicated that the shoulders, the hips, from the top view, they occur in different places in space. I like to compare where one thing is to the next, kind of what I said about the skull. So if I can find where one of these shoulders is, where in space is the hip in relation to that? If I can find that, I can say, okay, where is the knee in relation to that hip? Where's this knee and where is this knee? And you start to find those points in your log. So in my log, I might identify that the knee is here, I might identify that the hip is here, and I might identify that the shoulder is here. So it gives you 3 points to relate to each other. And there was a movie made where they hooked up a computer somehow to someone's eyes and had them analyze forms. And the way the eyes work from around a skull, for example, is you scan way faster than you realize. You scan and you scan and you scan, and those scans that were generated on the computer were beautiful drawings of the objects. It's a really cool thing. And that's kind of the way I try to work. I try to just keep building. Okay, I know the head's here and it's related to the shoulder that's here. That shoulder. This is one side of the hip. I know the hip is this wide, so now I know where the other side of the hip. I know the knee is here. I know the other knee must be, whatever. And you just keep finding those points. Yes. Sorry.
Can you see it?
No. Sorry.
Please. No. Okay. I see your movement, but can you see the movement?
Yeah. Sorry. Yes.
Scott, some of the craft stores, I know Michael sells little articulating models, wooden models. They work very good for getting that movement and that animation that you want to.
Yeah, they do. They do, but I learned with those that you can pose them wrong. There's something about the way a person moves, and if you kind of make it awkward, then it's awkward, even if you're using that model. But it is proportion-wise, and like if you're setting out to make a human, to have one of those models and set it in the position you want is very helpful. Yes.
Yeah, we had one of the professors I had in college for an art class, I believe it was in drawing, said the hardest thing a beginner doesn't understand is that the body doesn't move horizontally, perpendicularly. That when you have shoulder movement, you rarely move your shoulder on the flat line. But you're actually going to drop or move, which is going to cause. So I think as a beginner, one of the mistakes I know I made is you get that boxy look, because when you try to exhibit movement, you almost go from a logical perspective rather than from the true perspective of motion and movement.
A really interesting thing that I was taught early on from a really great sculptor that I know is just, if you always, like you're saying, always keep in mind that if you're carving a living thing, if you can't contain a skeleton, the skeleton cannot be in there, you're not going to fool anyone's eyes. So you always have to focus on that skeleton, like Scott's saying. The spine is the flexible portion of it. That's the makes up everything, and then flow and balance and all that. And everything else extends from that to make that spine interesting, and everything work together. So again, like he said, with that spine, that's your starting point. And for me, it is.
For me too.
Right.
Yep.
And then you can go anywhere with that. You can put them in any pose and make lots of different capabilities. But the spine has to happen, and it has to be there, and it has to work for your mind to perceive it, what we know as capability, and what is possible. However, where Brett was trying to expand on, don't just keep that as your, that's in your box. You have to step out and explore what's a little more, and what's more deep within that. Not just that outer what we know, but is that anywhere close, Brett? No, should I just shut up? No more donuts?
No, it is. You're making a sculpture. You're not making a deer. You're making something that...
It can be just the stylized form of a leaping deer.
And it still reads as deer.
Still, you identify because of the spatial cognizance that you talked about earlier. You recognize, oh, that's a leaping deer, even though when you really explore it, it doesn't look that much like one, detail, but it's there.
I just want to draw a little line here, just a line of movement to show another way. Rather than building a snowman, if this were an animal, just kind of maybe use a deer for example, I want to find those forms one at a time. Find the head, I want to find the shoulders, I want to find the belly, and I want to find the hips. So I need to, those all have to be composed on that line. If it's from the top view, is that line straight or is it curved? And where do they occur? And then of course anatomy, you know, you can study anatomy forever and still not understand it. But if you get a general sense that everything is composed off of that line. All right, a dog. Did I say deer? It's really hard to draw from here. I've never done this.
One of the most difficult things I find is the limitation of the cylinder. When we're using these profile drawings, is you always imagine it fits in, and then you go around the corner and discover the foot that's sticking out is actually on the outside of the cylinder. Because from doing profile views, you're working with a block, you know, in your mind. So how do you address that issue when you're...
If you take the foot, you have a good story, and it sells more.
It's a really tough thing to address. What always happens to me, I always manage to fit the figure in, it seems. It's believable. It doesn't have to be correct, it's just somewhat believable. But I compose so tightly. I'm trying to solve this problem in my work, but
Well, I think one of the big mistakes is there's nothing wrong with the timber. The timber is never too small.
Yeah.
The thing that you're making is too big.
Right.
Just make it smaller.
It's the scale.
Like, don't compromise your form because of the timber. Like, you want a 6-foot thing and your timber is only this big. Well, you can't. You have to have a thing that's...
That's exactly
As far as the line, I think the line is already there, and the round log already got the line if you'll use it. The whole outside the log is a line.
It is.
And it's perfect. I mean, that's where everything fits. If you'll use that outside that log as your line, you get the movement. I mean, like Nick was saying, start with when I first come to Ridgway, I'd take a log that big, make it square, and make it round again. I didn't know how to use the round log.
Right.
I watched Randy Barney whoop out his little 45-minute eagle. The biggest thing I noticed was it took him 45 minutes. It took me 6 hours to do.
Right.
I could have toted the scraps off of my shirt. That was probably my biggest learn. But the line, I feel like I try to use the outside of the log.
Me too.
As the line. I mean, you know, you can diagonal it, but the shape is there.
Right.
And then, build
The
in.
shape of that body is
you
already
use
there.
that back line as the building tool, and then build inward.
Yep.
Well, I do
That's
it.
exactly right. And a lot of times I compose so tight within that I end up with no base. Because I'm seeing it right at the edge of the line, and there might be a little bump out of my log, and that's what made me carve what I'm carving.
Right.
There's a little bump on the log that says, oh my God, that's an elbow. Now I just got to find the rest of the figure in there. And I work everything off, and then I end up at the bottom of the log, and my feet are on the ground. And it's just my inability to scale it because I just follow what I'm doing.
Well, also, answering my own question, I feel sometimes because there is, I'm going, oh, I've lost the elbow or the knee where it's gone out the side of the cylinder. So you have to pull it round, and you're going, happy accidents. It's put another aspect into my sculpture that I wouldn't have thought of, because you have to work around it, yeah? Pulls you about, tells you what to do.
Yep. That's true. Your turn, Brett.
Wait, talk about a blank look.
Yeah.
Well, what I was actually thinking about is, because this stuff, I'm not, Scott's really, really well schooled and or compared to me anyway.
I tell everybody that.
And I had to do a lot of this exploration and still am trying to figure out, this process. And
It should
sometimes
be
it gets,
forever, isn't it?
Yeah, it should be an ongoing
Once you have
process.
the answer, you're all done.
And I think that one of the really confusing things is, we a lot of times all carve by ourselves, and the people around us are telling us these, completely amazed by the magic that we're creating. And it's a really distracting thing, that we're, and yet so we go back to our work and we go, wow, how do I improve? Because apparently I'm like Michelangelo already, because every single one, we've been told this hundreds of times. And so what is it that I'm missing? How, we're confused not only by the pollution from out, these other opinions, yeah, I'm completely distracted. But after all, I like to compare what I do to, find other forms of art or, say music. We can understand music really well, or literature. And, what kind of music do we like to listen to, or what kind of things do we like to read? And those are I find what we do to be very similar to those things. We're just telling a story. We're just not using words, we're using form, and it's telling a story. And there's, that's why I've, never mind that. The story is, do you want to write more of a journalistic story, more of an encyclopedic story, or do you want to, what do you read? I don't know if people really read, other than Mick, the encyclopedia for literary choice, but a lot of people are greatly entertained by stories, a good story. And some of us like to read really realistic stories that are very believable and venture out from there. And I think that's a really important part of the process, I guess, of how do you get to this, these places. I think you've got to have that juice that is the spirit of it, the soul of it, like Roger was talking about quite a bit yesterday, and then use these tools to implement that. But if you use only those tools, you'll notice that you're lacking something. Like the square shoulders. Why are the shoulders? You can use the mechanics of it to help find and identify with why the shoulders are wrong. But after all, you get through all it's technically correct. It's still got to have an emotion to it. It's still got to speak. Otherwise, it's got to entertain us past that, or else you lose your viewer. It's got to tell a good story.
It's got to be exciting from the very beginning. To a great sculpture, and anybody that's ever walked into a museum understands the difference between a great sculpture and a not, or a great piece of art. It doesn't have to be a sculpture. There's so many things that if you walk up across onto a Michelangelo or a Rodin or some of these pieces and they're beautifully illuminated across the room, you can see from clear down the hall that there's just something wonderful about them. And that is that very thing you're talking about, that initial sense is there all the way back to me. I lost my train of thought, thinking about my bear hair. I wanted to try again to answer Keith's question a little bit. When you're sculpting a form down, you have the major form. If I'm trying to make this bear, it's full of contours. The main contour would be if you stretched a piece of rubber over it, so everything was pulled kind of together, you would have one contour. And within that, you start to get secondary contours. Does everybody know what a contour line is? It's a line that shows a representation of the form in two-dimensional space. So if I'm trying to show the roundness of the neck, the contour line might look something like that. Then you get secondary contours. As you look closer and closer and closer, there's smaller and smaller contours. Even in carving, drawing, the line quality between the transitions of these, to me, is always very important. This line is more important than the contour. How do you, showing the transition from one form to another, really defines what the form is made out of. A big furry bear doesn't have a ton of differentiation between where the belly is and where the leg is. And there's just a very subtle contour maybe there. But between the legs that are separated, you might have a very deep cut, a very strong line, if you would. I don't know where I'm going with this. Cuts.
The rubber is getting the big
quality of the line. Go ahead. It's all right. Any other questions?
Well, some of the subtle contours, especially on animals, can be defined somewhat by the fur, by large long fur, short fur, contrasts. So it's textural.
It is textural, yeah, and the fur on a bear certainly isn't the same from top to bottom. Anybody else have anything to add?
How would you?
It's like an auction. Oh, no, you moved your hand, you gotta say
Yes,
something.
you in the corner. Nope, you raised your hand.
Well, I'll say something then. It's just an itch, but one way I approach.
Next question.
One way I like to see a piece before I carve it is to imagine like a really thin cloth draped over it, and that helps me to carve the shape of the thing without making really committal cuts,
Right.
like the undercut. So if you imagine, the sheet draped over like a person dressed as a ghost, so you get the head in the position you want along the shoulders without making any undercuts, or, like behind the arm or the elbow, so everything can move if you want it to move. So, and then when you feel you're happy with where the head is and where the shoulders are, then maybe you can start to come over the chin. But don't, get in there straight away. I find a lot of the process in the carving is forcing yourself to do the cuts that you're uncomfortable with rather than the ones that you find easy. It's like eating a meal with something you don't like, but something you do. You're just forcing yourself to make those cuts, to make those decisions that you're not comfortable with necessarily. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Did you guys hear what he was saying about the sheet? It's a great way to break down to those.
Draw that over the bear. Draw a sheet over the bear.
Basically just connecting those into simpler shape.
You never do those big cuts. You'll never get used to
Expand it out. So it's just.
Well, you don't expand it out beyond.
That would be a place to start for people like me.
Yeah, there's the place to start is as close as you can get. And a great example of this is when you see a wonderful sculpture of a woman, and then she has drapery over her, and there's certain areas that you can tell her body's, even though it's made out of stone, and her body's really not under it. It's under it. So you have, even though there's drapery over, you still indicate where the knee is, where the forms is, and it gives you the illusion.
It's just that hint.
That it's all, just a hint, yeah, that's all there. That's kind of, by draping this over, you're just eliminating all of these secondary contours. You're just trying to get it to the most basic.
Yeah, it comes back to I think the problem solving of figuring out, what pieces don't belong there. Like Bob was saying earlier, how do you might not know where the form is, but if you can at least identify with where the form isn't, if this is your log here, and if you can at least make a few decisions to say, well, this definitely isn't going to be there.
That line right there is a very important starting line. That's a big, long, dedicated cut that's going to, from this view, establish the basis of the rest of that. And then right down to the bridge, from the top of the head to the end of the nose. So cut. You can just draw a cylinder around that and start making straight lines.
Yep, so this is coming
squares
along.
and triangles. These are the basic forms that you can just lay in there and start making those.
What's that?
Do it without a base. Speak right to the bottom.
Yeah, that's right.
You see that?
Damn it. So, there's the first big cut.
Yep. For that view.
For that view, and the second big cut.
It helps me to get a point of reference. On a bear, it seems like it's right in between his eyes there. Once I get to that point, I can kind of carve out from that.
Right.
I don't know. You talk about reference points, but is there a specific reference point on an animal or a human?
Definitely, it is not the nose for me. It's more the spine is my initial spine, shoulders, hips. If it's a full animal, is my reference point always.
But you are movement.
Right. Right. So I think one mistake though, that many people will make when trying to carve at the very beginning, if you're carving one of your first bear heads, is you only will look at it from the front. And it's oftentimes if you're stuck looking at the front, it's never going to be right. No matter how well you sculpt the eyelashes, you have to turn it and you have to see in depth where these forms occur, and from the top, and from when I carve, I carve around and around and around and around and around and around till my feet hurt. It's just, I have to. I have to look at it from under, from over. But we all have different degrees of how important that is.
The other thing I think that's a really big mistake when you're starting to carve is that you think that it's going to be easier. All right, I'm going to carve a person, so I'm going to make this really easy for myself. I'm not going to go for motion. I'm not going to go for movement and all these other things. I'm going to carve a really basic person, so I'm going to carve this, which is probably the hardest thing to do, to breathe life into a form. It's just telling you so little. This, I call it the mug shot, and it's like I find myself a lot of times doing, I'm going to start with, this motion, start blocking out these lines to get this form that's moving, and before I know it, I've kind of squared it back up and gotten it stale again. And it's not easy to do well. It's easy, like it's easier to carve with motion than it is without, because what you're experiencing it as a viewer, you experience as a sculptor as well. So the more that the object actually carries you through it as you're producing it, and that's what Scott's really into. I think the dance, Roger's talking about that dance, and you have to be in that spirit of the movement. Or it's like your handwriting. Your handwriting tells a lot. The line quality of your handwriting as to the kind of things that are coming in your mind and just how you're feeling.
Right.
If you have really kind of stale cuts, your piece is going to feel that way. Like I never understood when I still do it. I'm a messy carver, and not for some people. Like you're dealing with a lot of texturing. I know Simon Hedger does a lot of texturing. He's a British Welsh carver, and a lot of times I clean the surface so that it's a simple form and there's not a lot of distraction, so that I can see what's going on in the piece, and also helps me get past. Like if I've started with, because I kind of do the drape method as well, so I get started here. Not so much on a bear, you can you know where you're going with it, but if you're doing a composition where you don't know where it's going, kind of like this comment, but you make it up as you go.
Well, and I find sometimes I have to step back or take some time away, and I like doing two carvings at once, because what happens to me is I've got my picture, I know what I want, and when I look at it, sometimes it looks like this one, and it's not what it is.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So taking photographs of it or staying away from it for a while, and then I come back and say, oh, that doesn't belong. But I didn't see that it didn't belong because I had my vision, and it was superimposed on what I was doing, and it was an illusion that I had it.
I think you hit the picture thing pretty big, because that's how many people carve at a competition. It's like, oh, you think it's spot on, and then you look back at it in pictures and you think, wow, well, that was pretty obvious. I should have cut some off here. And so we started doing that for a while, is taking pictures after the first day or the second day, and then going back in the evening and looking at the pictures, and sometimes
the pictures will tell you so much.
Yeah, they'll tell you
Plus
real.
they're not stereoscopic unless you're way back with a really good camera.
Yeah.
So they're really telling you what's wrong. The other thing I want to say about competition, since you brought it up, is many of the competitions I've been to are really in a tiny restricted area where you can't get back.
No.
Yes, and I hate that, because I am yesterday I'm down between 3 trailers trying to get a half a mile away from my carving, because it needs to be beautiful from 100 yards and from 1 inch. So if I ever do a competition, it is not going to be limited in that space, because it really takes away a lot, in my opinion, what's important.
It really distorts, the whole, being that close to a piece, it really distorts everything, especially with carving a human figure. It's amazing how you can...
It's all related to the height of the sculptor. Yeah, you start seeing things, you're sculpting in like a perspective that is... Yeah, it does.
I found this when I was carving two 8-foot pieces earlier last year, and I was working from very accurate models, and I had to divide the models up into 8 feet in sections, mark it out on the log, and that helped me to copy the models that somebody else produced. But it was just an example. It really showed to me how important it is to divide that up and to step back, because it's those proportions down by your feet, and you're looking down at them, they don't look anywhere near 12 inches. You know, the whole thing is so distorted. It's like looking through a fisheye lens, you know. And if you're taking pictures of something, try and take it around 50 mils on your lens, because, you know, if it's wider than that, and then shooting at 28 mil, then everything's distorted. So the human eye sees at about 50 mils. If you set the camera to that and take the photos, they're a lot more closer to what you see.
What else? That's about it for what I got. Yes.
In all your schooling and stuff, is there any techniques or any kind of tricks for taking an image that's in your head and transforming that to your hand? You know what I mean? Because I have like a lot of great images in my head, and if I try to draw them out exactly like my mind sees them, you know, there's a difference there. Is there any kind of techniques or anything you crumple up on paper and try it out and look at the paper, which is what you're looking at?
Right.
Is there a way to make that connect?
Not necessarily that I know of. There was a couple exercises that we did that were really helpful where in three-dimensional we sculpted blindfold. So you took the vision out of it and everything was going by feel, and you'd be surprised at what you can come up with. It takes a while to adjust to it, but so that might be a way where you could, because you're forced to really think deep about what it is. And the other thing is drawing with your eyes closed, but holding a 3D object in one hand when you're blindfolded, and rendering it with the other hand. And you'd be surprised how you can transfer that information from one to the other. And when you're doing that, you can never take your pencil off the paper. Because as soon as you do, you lost where you were. So from the beginning, and you just keep finding those forms and finding them, and you can build that way. So maybe that might be something to try.
That's what I'm carving today. I'm blindfolded.
I'll be right beside you.
Do a team carving that one.
He's dangerous when he's not blindfolded.
Scott,
Yes.
can I just give a tip for people who don't draw? I've taught sculpture and drawing for many years in England, and a lot of people arrive and at some point through their schooling they've been told they can't draw, and then they're scared to draw. Everybody can draw. Making marks with anything on a piece of paper or in scratching in the ground with a stick, it's drawing. But one way I found to encourage people is to start keeping a scrapbook. Tear things out of magazines, pictures, things you spot on the internet. Create a scrapbook, and then in between on those pages, don't treat it as anything precious. Start sketching and drawing and saying, well, I like that, but I'd like it if it was this instead. And actually draw onto the scrapbook. And then you'll find, once you've actually drawn that, you can turn another page and, well, actually, I'll try it this way. And all of a sudden, you're drawing, you're putting your ideas out there, recording them. And you can go back. I've still got sketchbooks now that must be 30, 40 years old that I've kept. And I keep going back, and you find that ideas, it's also a good way of finding out what you're about, what your ideas are about, what subjects you want to work on, because you will find if you do that, you keep returning to similar ideas. You have a passion for the figure, you have a passion for bears, passion for abstract, whatever, but you always keep, in some ways, you always keep returning to your heart, to your roots. So actually keeping that scrapbook is a really good way of generating ideas and getting confident about drawing.
Yeah, excellent, thank you.
I find that being a production carver, we all have to be, you have to have bears. If you're going to make a living, try to make a living in this business, you have to have inventory to sell. So you have to make bears. And I've got them down, but I mean, lately I'm trying to think outside the bear, and eagles and that kind of stuff. But it's just, even changing my bears around, because I'll go brain dead, just bear after bear after bear after bear after bear. Moving Scott down to here, or get some movement or something different going, a different configuration. And that's helped me a lot, because I was stagnating, in the beginning, just
right. Just A big point, I think, is to not be afraid to do it. I mean, what is it? It's a piece of wood.
Yeah.
No, most of us
I
have
found
a
courage
pile
out of my
underneath
wood
it.
pile, at my firewood pile.
Yeah.
19 logs one day.
Dayton always said, what you always used to say to me, Dayton, if you don't try it, you just didn't grow that day. And that is so, so true. I repeat that in my mind now for 3
You
years.
gotta play with disaster all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, if you float that line, you're getting the max out of it.
Yep.
You're playing safe, you ain't doing it.
There's a famous saying that if you never try to do what you think you can't do, you'll never develop what you really can do.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I don't know, if some people go by what I did, it's nothing fabulous, but I've never done a dancing bear. And I just tried to make it standing on one foot, one arm up, one down, and turning like your drawing had, and trying to go from that, and just risking humiliation if I screwed it up. But I mean, it's over in our slot. It comes out good enough that the average folks, they like it. The people
most
don't.
important thing is that you learn from it.
Yeah.
I mean, more whether somebody likes it or not. If you don't, especially at an event like this, I mean, we're all here to hopefully to learn from each other. I know I certainly am. What I sculpt, I want to try something that I haven't tried before. Bob and I are going to try something today that neither one of us. I know what I'm doing. I'm not sure if he does, but.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
I can't tell.
Top secret.
Something
That way we can change it. If you don't tell anybody what you're doing, you're not committed until auction time.
I kind of want to expand on something Brett was talking about. You know, if you like to read a certain kind of book, you know, some people like a fairy tale, some people, that a lot of people say, well, realism isn't really art, or this really isn't art. But I think it's what's inside the person, because I've seen people that carve cartoonish, but that's the way their mind thinks. And if they try to do real, it never has the feeling. But if you're a cartoonish person and that's the kind of stuff you like to read and that's who you are, it will come out in the artwork. But if you're trying to do something that's not you, it never, I feel like they work and they never get the passion in it. So I think you gotta find, you know, if you're a realistic carver and that's what you're passionate about, you know, play with some of the other things. But
Yeah, I was going to say, make sure.
But I don't think there's a right and wrong.
There isn't. What'd you say? What'd Joe Rigo say? He said.
Oh yeah, this was a few years ago on the forum. There was one of these heated discussions about what is art and what is craft and all this. And Joe said, you know, something along the lines of, I don't really care what it is that people call what I do. All I really care about is how many smiles.
Yeah.
You know, the feeling that he gets from making the things he gets, and what that does to the people that enjoy it.
If you're carving something, you're miserable, you're not carving the right.
That's right. That's why my bears have stunk forever. You know, now I finally decided. You know what? I have, like Keith said, I have to. I've started to build up expenses. Now I have to make money. I can't just, you know, walk around and say I'm going to carve what I want to carve. I have
We're all
to do this.
production carvers, but we want to be artists. Now, deep down in my heart, I want to be an artist. I got kicked out of art class for chewing gum.
What I would say about that, though, is that you're a production carver, and that's what you do to make a living. It doesn't mean that you're not an artist or you can't be an artist. It just means that maybe you can't make a living being an artist, but you can make a living selling bears. And I think that there's, you know, you're never going to get to be, and this is something that I struggle with because I'm a production carver essentially. I do commissioned work. Everything I do is commissioned. So my work ends up being the limitation generally of the creativity of my customer. You know, they come and say, oh, this is what I'd like. I'm not spending this, you know, typically I haven't spent my years going, oh, this is my body of work that I'm going to study this year, and maybe some people will buy it from this gallery, you know. But you're not going to ever get there to that place if you're just doing the bears.
But maybe I can get halfway between an artist and a production carver. I'd settle for that because right now I'm on the left side of the scale.
It's a choice you have to make, but it's also a choice that your life is going to allow too. You still have to eat, pay bills, you know.
And you can, you know, just, I would say, slowly start adding some motion to your bears and starting putting some lines and playing them.
4 or 5 bears
motion
and
doesn't make
one
it
of something
any
else.
Well, it
more
makes it
art
more fun.
than not having motion. That's not art is. Oh man, that was.
And that's the end of our time.
Yeah, you know what? I think we're out of time.
Here we go. Actually, for everyone who wants to learn drawing from the right side of the brain.
is one of the greatest books, whether people have never drawn anything or if they actually do have some art skills. But they will get the most out of that book for learning how to sketch and getting into the sketching and the drawing. And one thing I had done in art class was we had to draw negative space. That was one of our studies. And it transfers well into carving because that's what you want to remove.
Right.
So rather than concentrating on what you're drawing.
Concentrate on what you're not drawing.
Exactly.
And I think in that book they touch on quite a bit, which is contour drawing with your eyes shut, blindfolded, because it forces you to focus about what's going on in your mind's eye. And it teaches you, because I think that really what a lot of this boils down to, is your ability to see. Why does it look like this when I want it to look like that?
Right.
And you have to identify, you have to actually see what it is that you're doing and how it's different from the thing that you want it to be.
But like
And that
she had
happens-
said, everybody can draw, but a lot of people got kicked out of art class.
And it's understanding what it is you're making. I mean, to set out and make a bear, okay, I'm either A, going to learn the system, I'm going to buy the book and learn the system, or I'm going to learn the bear. Two very different things in my opinion. You know, and the more you look, the closer you look.
I say learn the bear. Other
I say
people
learn the
say
bear,
learn the
too.
system. It's just it's how your mind works.
Scott,
yes,
you've referred to a number of books. I'm a book person. I like to read reference material. I haven't read a novel in 30 years. Don't care to. That's somebody else's imagination. Could you, the both of you, post on the forum some of the books you find the most popular, along with good old ISBN, so we can find the damn things?
Yeah, sure. I only have a couple.
You've got books. Both of you have books that if you've got a question in your mind, you go to that book to look it up. It's your references. Would you share those with us, please?
Sure. One in particular, there's my two favorite books. Ken Holtgren, is that how you say it? The animal drawing.
That's a tan. I've got that.
Excellent book.
Great illustrations.
Yeah, I haven't seen
I
that.
found this one at a used bookstore.
Yeah.
Bridgman's
No,
Anatomical drawings, I found that's a good one. It actually breaks down every single part of the body, hands, necks, torsos.
Can you post it with the ISBN?
Yeah, I have it here.
And just don't forget, when you start getting into the animal books that are showing you the muscles and the bones, it all comes on that first. If you lose that, if you don't maintain that first line, you're missing something there.
You should trap the animal and skin them, and then you'll see.
Taxidermy.
They don't allow that.
There's one more book I highly recommend for anybody interested in figurative art. Kenneth Clark, The Nude, is an excellent book about starts from the beginning of history, goes through the Renaissance and up into modern art, and it talks about energy and form and everything from Greek sculpture all the way up, and it is really well written. I'm not a big reader, but I was able to read through this. I highly recommend that book. I think that's it. At the sunshine, I think we should go carve now. Yes, Michelle.
A reference is get the taxidermy books and get the fish posters for your fish.
Fish posters?
Out of the taxidermy books, and then if you look at the taxidermy books of the forms, that's a start.
They are good.
They're real good.
You're right.
Excellent reference.
Thank you all.